The last lantern at the Clearwater Gulch social flickered against the August night sky, and Edna Dalton stood at the center of a suddenly empty dance floor with her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every man who had approached her that evening had fled. Not one of them had stayed. The musicians had packed their fiddles into worn cases. The women had gathered their shawls and whispered behind their fans. The punch bowl sat half empty on a table draped in faded calico. Surrounded by the ruins of a celebration that had come apart at the seams, the moment Edna's secret had walked through that door on two legs and a borrowed suit. His name was Franklin Rue, and he had announced to the gathered crowd of Clearwater Gulch, New Mexico, in the summer of 1882 that Edna Dalton was a woman of ruined reputation, that her family back east had practically sold her passage west to be rid of the scandal, and that any man in this room would be a fool to court her. The room had believed him. Of course it had. Franklin Rue owned the only bank between here and Santa Fe. Edna had not cried. She had held her chin at an angle that cost her everything, and she had watched man after man peel away from her orbit like smoke off a dying fire. Hank Belden, Roscoe Fairchild, even sweet, stammering Will Archer, who had promised her 3 dances and delivered 1. And then there was only one person left in the social hall. He was leaning against the far wall near the door to the kitchen, a man she had not once looked at all evening because he had not once looked at her, or so it had seemed. He held a cup of punch he had clearly not touched. His hat was still on his head inside a building, which was a minor social crime she had noticed in passing earlier and filed away as evidence of someone deeply uninterested in being there. His boots were clean but plain. His shirt was the honest tan of a working man, not the pressed white of a man who wanted to impress anyone. He was watching Franklin Rue leave. He was not watching Edna at all. And then, as if he felt the weight of her gaze cross the room and land on him like a stone dropped in still water, he turned his head and looked directly at her. His eyes were dark. His expression was unreadable. He did not smile the performative smile of a man seizing an opportunity. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he is genuinely trying to understand. He pushed off the wall. He walked toward her. He set the untouched cup of punch down on the nearest table as he passed it. He stopped 2 feet in front of her, close enough that she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the evidence of years spent squinting into a sun that showed no mercy. "I am August Graves," he said. "I have a ranch 12 miles north. I did not enjoy this social even before it went sideways. I am sorry that man said what he said." Edna stared at him. "That is all," he said. "I do not have anything clever to follow it with." And that was how it began. But to understand what it meant, you had to go back to the very start of that same day, when Edna Dalton had stepped off the southbound stage into the red dust of Clearwater Gulch for the very first time, carrying 2 bags and a determination she had spent 4 months constructing like a fortress around a broken thing. Edna was 26 years old. She had been born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to a family that had once possessed a moderate fortune and a great deal of pride. The fortune had evaporated after her father's business partner had committed an elaborate fraud and vanished, leaving her father liable for debts he had never agreed to in any document he could find. The pride had lasted considerably longer, which had made everything worse. She had been engaged to a man named Charles Whitmore, a banker's son with excellent manners and cold eyes. They had been engaged for 11 months when she had discovered that he was simultaneously engaged to a girl in Boston and conducting a third arrangement with a widow in Baltimore. When she had confronted him with the evidence, he had not been ashamed. He had been annoyed. He had told her that a woman in her family's financial circumstances had very little standing to make demands of anyone. She had broken the engagement publicly, loudly, and at a dinner party his mother had organized. It had been the most satisfying and most destructive thing she had ever done. Philadelphia had not forgiven her for it. Society operated on specific rules, and one of those rules was that a woman did not embarrass a powerful man in front of his peers, regardless of what he had done. The story had been retold in every parlor in the city, and in each retelling Edna had become a little more hysterical, a little more unreasonable, a little more responsible for her own downfall. Her mother had wept. Her father had said nothing, which was worse. Her younger sister Clara had slipped her a newspaper advertisement 3 weeks after the incident, circled in pencil. The Territorial Gazette. New Mexico Territory. Wanted. Respectable women of good character for frontier community settlement, Clearwater Gulch, organized by the Ladies' Settlement Society of New Mexico, 1882. Edna had written the letter that same night. She had arrived now in Clearwater Gulch on a Tuesday morning in August with $70, 2 bags, a box of books she refused to leave behind, and the name of a woman called Mrs. Beatrice Harlow who was meant to receive her and help her find work and lodging. The town itself was smaller than the advertisement had implied. One main street, a general store, a livery, a telegraph office, a land office, a saloon that operated under the deceptively respectable name of the Continental Club, a church whose white paint had not survived its second winter, and the Clearwater Hotel, which was where the stage stopped. Mrs. Beatrice Harlow was there, and she was exactly as her letters had suggested, a compact, bright-eyed woman of 50 with the bearing of a retired schoolteacher and the practical directness of someone who had been surviving the frontier for 20 years. "You are taller than I pictured," Beatrice said, shaking Edna's hand with both of hers. "Good. Tall women have an easier time being taken seriously out here. Come, I will show you to your room before the social tonight. You will want to change your dress." "There is a social tonight," Edna said. "There is a social every other Saturday in the summer, and you arrived on the right day for it. It is how the community operates. People come in from the ranches. The unmarried men and women arrange themselves with a great deal of ceremony and very little actual honesty, and then they go home and think about it. Some of them eventually marry. It is a civilized system if you do not look too closely at its mechanics." Edna had looked at her bags and then at Mrs. Harlow. "I did not come here to find a husband." "Then you have nothing to worry about tonight except getting to know your neighbors," Beatrice said, with a smile that suggested she did not believe a word of this but was too polite to say so. What Edna did not know, as she changed into her second-best dress in a small, clean room on the second floor of the Clearwater Hotel, was that her history had preceded her by 4 days. Franklin Rue had a cousin in Philadelphia named Thomas Rue, and Thomas Rue moved in exactly the same social circles that had chewed up and spit out Edna Dalton. A letter had traveled west faster than any stage. The letter had arrived at the Clearwater Gulch Bank, and Franklin Rue, who believed deeply in the importance of protecting the community he had essentially purchased the right to gatekeep, had read it and formed opinions. He had not said anything yet. He was waiting to see what kind of woman stepped off the stage. He was a patient man when patience served his interests. Edna had arrived. She had looked capable and careful, and entirely too composed for someone in a precarious situation. Franklin Rue had decided she was exactly the kind of trouble a decent community did not need. He had pocketed the letter and gone home to dress for the social. Now, 12 miles north of all of this, August Graves was in the middle of an argument with himself that he was losing. He stood on the porch of his ranch house with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands, watching the afternoon light go flat and amber the way it did before it started its long fall into evening. He did not want to go to the social. He had not wanted to go to the last 3 socials. He had attended 2 of them anyway because his foreman, a 40-year-old Mexican man named Pedro Ibanez who had worked the Graves Ranch since before August had inherited it from his uncle, had told him that a rancher who did not participate in community events was a rancher who would eventually find himself without community support when he needed it. Pedro was usually right about these things, which was irritating. August Graves was 31 years old. He had come to Clearwater Gulch 5 years ago, after his Uncle Clement had died of a fever and left him 340 acres, 40 head of cattle, a good well, and a set of debts he had spent 3 years paying off. He had grown up in Missouri, the son of a man who had worked the railroads and a mother who had run a boarding house. He was not the kind of man who had been raised toward anything romantic or social. He had been raised toward the practical. He had been engaged once briefly to a woman named Ruth who had decided after 6 months of engagement and one visit to the ranch that the frontier life was not, in fact, the adventure she had imagined. She had gone back east with her trunk and his ring, and no hard feelings on either side, which August had privately found a little devastating, because the absence of hard feelings meant there had not been enough feeling to begin with. He had worked that realization out alone on this same porch over the course of several evenings, and then he had buried it under the weight of everything a ranch demanded and had not brought it out since. He was not, he told himself regularly, a lonely man. He was a solitary man. There was a difference. Pedro appeared in the yard below the porch, leading 2 horses, both of them already saddled. He did not say anything. He just looked at August with the particular expression of a man who has already won an argument. "I hate that you do this," August said. "You hate the social. You do not hate the horse," Pedro said. August finished the cold coffee, set the cup down on the porch rail, and walked down the steps. The ride into Clearwater Gulch took just under an hour. Pedro talked about the price of feed, and a fence that needed mending on the east pasture, and a mare that was behaving strangely, which August was grateful for because it kept him from having to think about the social. The sky went from amber to pink to the deep bruised purple of early evening by the time they reached the edge of town, and the social hall was already lit from within, the sound of a fiddle working through its tuning like a man stretching before lifting something heavy. Pedro stabled the horses. August stood outside the hall door for a moment longer than was socially appropriate. "You are breathing like you are about to face a firing squad," Pedro said. "I would prefer a firing squad," August said. "You will go in, you will have punch, you will speak to at least 3 people. You will not stand in a corner the entire time. Those are my conditions." "Your conditions," August said flatly. "Your conditions which you agree with privately. You are welcome." Pedro held the door open. August went in. The hall was perhaps 50 people, which was a good turnout for summer, when the ranchers were busy and the farmers were busier. He recognized most faces. He nodded to the ones he knew well enough to nod to. He accepted a cup of punch from Mrs. Eleanor Fairchild, who was Roscoe's mother and who greeted everyone at the punch table with the serene authority of a woman who considered herself the social backbone of Clearwater Gulch. He found a wall. He stood near it. He watched. He noticed Edna Dalton approximately 2 minutes after she entered the hall. He could not have explained why precisely. She did not do anything dramatic. She walked in with Mrs. Beatrice Harlow at her side, wearing a green dress that was a little more refined than what most women here wore to socials, and she looked around the room with the expression of someone doing a very quick and very accurate assessment. Not nervous, not excited, not the expression of a woman husband hunting, which he recognized because he had seen it at enough of these events to know its shape. She looked like someone who was taking in information and filing it carefully. She was also, he noted, and then noted that he had noted, a striking woman. Dark hair pinned up with what appeared to be the minimum number of pins required to keep it in place. Brown eyes that moved quickly. A posture that was straight without being rigid, as if she had been taught to stand well and had then forgotten it was taught, and it had just become the way she stood. He looked away. He was not here for that. He spent the next 2 hours talking to the 3 people Pedro had mandated, including a very long conversation with the blacksmith about a new hinged gate mechanism he was considering, which August found genuinely interesting and which justified the entire evening as far as he was concerned. He watched the dancing without participating. He noted that Edna Dalton danced twice, efficiently and without excessive enthusiasm, and that at least 4 men had approached her over the course of the evening with what appeared to be the standard social overtures of the frontier. The compliment, the request for a dance, the hovering that meant they were considering something longer. He also noticed, because he was the kind of man who noticed things without meaning to, that Franklin Rue had arrived late and had spent a notable amount of time talking to other men in small groups around the edges of the room rather than on the dance floor, and that after each of these small conversations, one or more of the men glanced at Edna Dalton with an expression that had shifted from interest to something more cautious. August had known Franklin Rue for 5 years. He did not like him. He had done business with him out of necessity and had paid off the last of his uncle's bank debts a year ago specifically, so he would never have to do business with him again. He recognized the behavior he was watching now. Franklin Rue was spreading something. He was excellent at that. By the time the evening had worn itself down to the last lantern and the musicians were packing their cases, August understood what had happened. He had watched it unfold in real time. He had watched the men peel away from Edna one by one, watched her chin go up by increments the way a woman's chin goes up when she is refusing to let her face tell the truth about what is happening, watched the other women cluster near the door and cast the particular sidelong glances of people who have been told something they cannot unknow. He also understood that Franklin Rue had left 30 seconds ago, slipping out the back door of the hall with the self-satisfaction of a man who has accomplished his evening's purpose, and that the hall was now functionally empty except for him and Edna Dalton. He could have left. He had been about to leave. His hat was on his head and his cup of untouched punch was in his hand and the door was 12 feet away. He looked at her. She was standing in the middle of the empty dance floor with her hands clasped at her waist and her chin still up at that precise costly angle, and she looked like a woman who was holding herself together by pure will and intended to keep doing so for exactly as long as was necessary. He crossed the room. After he said what he said, which was not clever and was not a performance, Edna stared at him for a long enough moment that he wondered if he had made an error. "You have a ranch 12 miles north," she said finally. "That is correct. And you did not enjoy this social." "I have not enjoyed any social I have attended," he said. "I attend them because my foreman believes it is important for community relations. He is usually right." Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, not yet, but the first layer of a defense coming down very slightly, the way a door opens a crack before anyone decides whether to open it all the way. "That is a remarkably honest thing to say to someone you have just met," she said. "I find dishonesty takes more energy than I have available," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Do you know what Franklin Rue said about me?" He met her eyes. "I suspect I know the shape of it. I did not hear the specific words." "The specific words," she said, and her voice was even and controlled, "were that I am a woman of ruined reputation and that my family sent me west to be rid of the scandal. The first part is a matter of perspective, and the second part is partially true, and neither part is any of his business." August said nothing. He waited. "My reputation was ruined because I ended a dishonest engagement publicly rather than quietly," she said. "I do not regret the ending. I occasionally regret the public part, but only occasionally. Franklin Rue is a man who profits considerably from controlling what other people think of each other," August said. "He has done similar things before. He has never faced any consequences for it." Her eyes sharpened. "Is that meant to warn me or to explain to me that justice is unlikely?" "Both," he said. "I believe you deserve an honest account." She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the cup of punch he had set down on the nearby table, which was technically hers by proximity, and drank what was left of it, a purely practical gesture. He liked that about it. "Will you walk me back to the hotel?" she asked. "Not because I require an escort, because the conversation is more interesting than the alternative, which is walking back alone in the dark thinking about Franklin Rue." "Yes," he said. They walked the 3 blocks in the warm night air that smelled of dry dust and distant rain that would not arrive until fall. She told him that she was looking for work, that she had some teaching experience, that she intended to establish herself in Clearwater Gulch, and was not interested in being driven out by a man with a bank and an opinion. He told her that the town's schoolteacher had moved on to Santa Fe in the spring, and that the position had been nominally offered to a woman from Albuquerque who had not yet responded, which meant it might be available. He told her this without suggesting that she should pursue it, simply as a fact that appeared relevant. She noted the distinction and filed it. At the door of the hotel she turned and looked at him directly. "You were there all evening," she said. "I did not notice you until everyone else was gone." "I know," he said, without any performance in it, without any wound in it either. "That seems relevant," she said. "It might be," he said. "Good night, Miss Dalton." "Good night, Mr. Graves." He walked back toward the livery where Pedro was waiting, almost certainly asleep against a post, and he thought about the way she had said it. That seems relevant. Not a door opened. Not even a crack, but a hand placed against the wood, testing the weight of it. He was surprised to discover that he did not mind being noticed late. He was more surprised to discover that he wanted to be noticed again. Edna did not sleep well that night. Not because of Franklin Rue, although his face appeared at the edges of her thoughts like something unpleasant and persistent. She lay awake in the small, clean room at the Clearwater Hotel and turned over the evening's events with the precise and slightly relentless quality of a mind that had trained itself to examine everything. She had come west to start over. She knew what that meant in practical terms: find work, establish income, build a life that did not depend on anyone else's opinion of her past. She had not come west to find a man. She had learned in very specific and expensive terms what happened when you organized your future around a man's promises, and she was not interested in repeating that education. But August Graves was not a man who had offered her promises. He had offered her an honest conversation, a walk in the dark, and the observation that justice was unlikely. These were not romantic overtures. They were something more unsettling, because she did not know what category to put them in. She thought about the way he had said, "I find dishonesty takes more energy than I have available," like it was a simple matter of resource management. Like it had never occurred to him to be anything other than straight. She was not sure she had met a man like that before. She was not sure she trusted that she was reading him correctly. She fell asleep thinking about his hat still on his head inside a building, and how the small social crimes of a man are sometimes the most honest things about him. The next morning was a Sunday, and the town was in that particular half-awake state of a community that has been up too late the night before. Edna ate breakfast in the hotel dining room and asked the young woman who served coffee where the schoolhouse was. She was told it was on the south end of town, past the church, a single-room building that had been closed since May. The key was with the town council, and the town council was technically composed of 5 men, one of whom was Franklin Rue. Edna ate the rest of her breakfast with deliberate calm. Beatrice Harlow arrived at 9 o'clock precisely, in the manner of a woman who kept her own schedule without apology, and sat down across from Edna with the directness that Edna was coming to understand was simply her natural mode of operation. "How are you this morning?" Beatrice asked. "Determined," Edna said. "Tell me about the town council." Beatrice's eyebrows went up slightly. Then she settled in and began to talk, and for the next hour Edna received an education in the political and social architecture of Clearwater Gulch, New Mexico Territory, 1882. The town council was made up of Franklin Rue, who controlled the bank and therefore had leverage over a significant portion of the town's property owners. Thomas Holt, the general store owner, who was a fair man but cautious and easily influenced by whoever had spoken to him most recently. Reverend Caleb Morrison, who ran the church and who genuinely tried to be neutral but whose neutrality tended to function as a passive endorsement of whoever was currently in power. James Alcott, who owned the Continental Club and operated in a pragmatic middle ground between propriety and profit. And finally, a rotating 5th member elected by the townspeople annually, currently a cattle farmer named George Prentice, who had won the position primarily because he had run unopposed. The key to the schoolhouse is officially in the possession of the town council collectively, Beatrice said. But in practice, it is in Thomas Holt's general store because Reverend Morrison keeps losing things and Franklin Rue keeps the key to everything else in town, so no one wanted him to have this one too. So if I want to discuss the teaching position, I should speak to Thomas Holt, Edna said. You should speak to Thomas Holt, yes, but I would suggest you do it today before Franklin Rue has time to speak to him first. Beatrice paused. You should know that what happened last night will have made its way around most of the town by now. People talked on their way home. I am sorry for it. I am not ashamed of anything I have done, Edna said. I am only sorry that someone else is being paid to tell the story. Beatrice looked at her with an expression that was warm and a little fierce. Good. Hold on to that. There are women in this town who will support you, and there are women who will be too frightened of Franklin Rue to do so publicly. I am in the first category. So is Marta Ibanez, who is the wife of the foreman out at the Graves Ranch. So is Ellen Holt, Thomas's wife, who is the person who will actually influence Thomas's opinion if you need it to go your way. Edna filed all of this. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Franklin Rue is a patient and organized man, and he has been the most powerful person in this town for 8 years. He will not be easily outmaneuvered. Beatrice stood. But he has also never encountered someone quite like you, I suspect. Thomas Holt's general store was the center of town in every practical sense, the place where everything necessary came from, and where information traveled as freely as dry goods. Thomas himself was a round-faced man of 45 with a careful mustache, and a genuine quality of wanting to be fair that had never quite extended to the courage required to act on it when the stakes were real. Edna walked in at 10 in the morning, bought a bar of soap and a candle and a notebook, and then asked, as if it were a casual follow-up, whether the teaching position was still officially open. Thomas went through approximately 4 expressions in the span of 2 seconds. He watched him decide how to arrange himself. The position has been provisionally offered to someone in Albuquerque, he said. Has she accepted? A pause. Not in writing. Then it is not yet filled, Edna said pleasantly. I have 2 years of teaching experience from a private academy in Philadelphia and a strong interest in the position. If the council is accepting applications, I would like to submit one. She was aware of 2 other customers in the store who had gone very still and very attentive. Thomas Holt's eyes moved to the door and back. He was checking whether Franklin Rue was about to walk in. She could read that calculation precisely. I would need to consult the full council, he said. Of course, she said. I understand completely. I simply wanted you to know that I am here, that I am qualified, and that I intend to contribute to this community for a very long time. She smiled at him, a smile with nothing aggressive in it. Tell your wife I said hello. Beatrice has mentioned her very warmly. She took her purchases and left. She had just reached the boardwalk outside when she nearly walked into August Graves, who was coming out of the hardware store 2 doors down with a paper bag of what appeared to be iron fittings. They both stopped. He was in work clothes, more practical than what he had worn to the social the night before, a plain canvas coat over a shirt the color of weathered wood. His hat was on his head, which it apparently always was. He looked at her with the same direct and somewhat unclassifiable attention he had given her the night before. Miss Dalton, he said. Mr. Graves, she said. You are in town on a Sunday morning. I needed fittings for a gate mechanism, he said. You are in town conducting business, if I had to guess. I have just applied informally for the teaching position. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the country that borders a smile. Thomas Holt has a good heart, he said. His courage could stand to be taller. I noticed that, she said, a beat of silence that was not uncomfortable. The main street of Clearwater Gulch moved around them, Sunday slow, a horse at a rail, 2 women with parasols, a boy running after something. There is a problem, August said, and she understood from the directness of it that he was not building toward anything, just stating a fact. If Rue gets to the other council members before you establish yourself, the vote will go against you. He controls Holt through the bank and has influence over Prentice for similar reasons. You would need Morrison and Alcott in addition to Holt, and even then it is 3-2 at best. She looked at him. You have thought about this. I thought about it on the ride-in, he said. I also thought about what happened last night, which was not right, and I have some capacity to be useful if you want it. What capacity? She asked. Not suspicious, just direct. I pay my debts to nobody in this town, he said. Rue has no leverage over me. I sit on no council, but I have been ranching here 5 years, and I am known as someone who does not deal in dishonesty. If I speak for your character, it carries some weight with Morrison at least, who respects land-working men more than bang-coning ones, and I know James Alcott well enough to have a direct conversation. Edna studied him carefully. Why would you do this for someone you met last night? He met her eyes. Because what Rue did was wrong, and he will keep doing it to people if no one pushes back. And because you are the kind of person who walked into that store this morning with your chin up and your notes prepared, which is the kind of thing I respect regardless of anything else. The regardless of anything else landed in a specific place, and she felt it. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully. I want to be clear about something, though. I did not come here to owe anyone. I am not offering a debt, he said. I am offering a neighbor. She was quiet for a moment. A neighbor. It was the right word. She did not know why it landed so softly in a chest that had been braced for a year against anything soft. All right, she said. A neighbor. He nodded. He adjusted the paper bag of iron fittings under his arm. I will call on Reverend Morrison this afternoon. He holds a second service on Sunday evenings for the ranching families who cannot make the morning service. I will speak to him before it. I will speak to Beatrice about Alcott, she said. He nodded again. He started to turn away and then paused. There is a small matter I should mention, she waited. My foreman's wife, Marta Ibanez, runs a reading group for the women on the outlying ranches. They have been without a teacher for the children since May. If you want work that pays while the council decides, she would know who to speak to about organizing it. I will find Mrs. Ibanez, Edna said. She comes to town on Wednesdays, he said. She will be at Beatrice Harlow's by 10. He walked away. She watched him go for approximately 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than was wise, and then turned in the opposite direction. The next weeks unfolded with the logic of a place that was still building its own rules, full of the compromises and small dignities and daily negotiations that turn a collection of people into a community. Edna met Marta Ibanez on a Wednesday, as August had said, at Beatrice Harlow's kitchen table over coffee that was strong enough to stand a spoon in. Marta was a small woman of sharp intelligence and deep warmth, a woman who had been born in New Mexico and whose family had been on this land before it was American territory, who had chosen her own life with a deliberateness that Edna recognized and felt aligned with immediately. They spoke for 2 hours about education and about children, and about what it meant to build something real in a place that was still mostly improvised. And by the end of it, Edna had been engaged informally to teach reading and basic arithmetic to the children of 6 outlying families 3 mornings a week, to be held at the Ibanez home on the Graves Ranch. She had not planned to end up at the Graves Ranch. She was not sure what to do with that. She went on a Thursday morning for the first session, arriving by the wagon Beatrice had arranged, and she found herself on a stretch of red dust land in the shadow of a mesa that was almost aggressively beautiful, the kind of land that required a person to renegotiate their relationship with scale. The ranch house was solid and unpretentious, a single-story adobe structure with a deep porch that ran the length of the front, and the outbuildings were clean and well-maintained, evidence of a man who valued function over appearance without neglecting either. Marta had arranged the kitchen of her own smaller house as the classroom. 6 children between ages 7 and 12 sat at the table or on stools with their slates, watching Edna with the particular combination of wariness and curiosity that children reserve for new teachers. Edna began. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, the clarity of it, the way you could watch a concept arrive in a child's eyes like a lamp being lit. She did not see August until she was leaving 2 hours later. He was at the corral fence when she came out of Marta's house, working with a rope in his hands, not performing the work but absorbed in it, the methodical attention of a man who does one thing at a time fully. He looked up when she crossed the yard toward the waiting wagon. "How did it go?" he asked. "Well," she said, "there is a girl named Rosa who is going to be remarkable." She read aloud from the primer twice over without prompting and then corrected 2 of my examples. He almost smiled. The country that borders a smile again, getting slightly closer to its destination. "That sounds like Rosa Villanueva. Her mother has been asking about schooling for a year." "She should have had it a year ago," Edna said. "Yes," he said, "she should have." A pause. She was aware that she was in no hurry to climb into the wagon. "The council meets Friday," he said. "Morrison spoke well of the possibility when I talked with him. Alcott was noncommittal but not opposed. Rue will push against it. Holt will go whichever way the wind blows hardest at that meeting." "And Prentice?" she asked. "George Prentice owes me a fair amount of goodwill from a fence dispute I helped him resolve 2 years ago. I had not meant to call that in for anything, but I think this is worth it." She looked at him. "You called in a debt for me." "I called in a debt for the children of this county who need a teacher," he said. "You happen to be a good one." She was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was doing something complicated to everything it touched. The mesa in the distance was the color of old copper. She felt something moving in her that she did not have clean language for. "You are a difficult man to argue with," she said. "I have been told that," he said. "Mostly by Pedro." She laughed. It came out before she could moderate it, a real laugh, unself-conscious, the kind she had been rationing for approximately a year. She saw him register it and register that he had caused it, and the country that borders Esmile arrived so close to its destination that she felt her own pulse react to it. She climbed into the wagon. She looked back once as it moved down the drive toward the road, not a dramatic backward look, just the natural turn of a person making sure of something. He was still at the fence. He was watching the wagon go. The town council met on Friday evening in the back room of the land office, and Edna was not permitted to attend because women were not members of the council and attendance was not open to the public. She sat in Beatrice Harlow's parlor with a book she was not reading and drank tea she kept forgetting was in her hand. Beatrice was knitting something industrious and saying comforting things at calibrated intervals. Outside the window the town settled into its Friday evening rhythms. At 8:30 the door opened and it was August Graves, which was not something she had expected, and he was wearing an expression she could not read and her heart did something involuntary. He looked at Beatrice first, then at Edna. The vote was 3-2 in favor of offering the position formally. Holt, Morrison, and Prentice, Rue and Alcott in opposition. Edna set down her teacup very carefully. 3-2, she said. "You are the schoolteacher of Clearwater Gulch," he said. Beatrice made a sound of satisfied triumph, and her knitting needles clicked together like a small celebration. Edna looked at August. He was watching her with that quality of steady attention that she had been trying to categorize for 2 weeks and had failed, because it did not fit any category she had available. It was not romantic attention, or at least it was not only that. It was the attention of a man who is watching someone he respects accomplish something that matters, and who is glad to have been part of it, and who is not asking for anything in return. "Thank you," she said. "The town needed a teacher," he said. "Now it has one." The weeks that followed were the kind that build foundations without announcing themselves as such. Edna opened the schoolhouse in September, painted the inside walls herself with help from 3 of the council wives who were, as Beatrice had predicted, firmly in the first category. She organized the children into reading groups by ability rather than age, which was considered somewhat unconventional, and had results within a month that even George Prentice, who had voted for her on faith and was watching her progress with mild anxiety, found impossible to argue with. She taught the ranch children on Thursday morning still, at the Ibanez home, because Marta had become a friend, and because the children on the outlying ranches deserved the same access as the town children. August had said nothing about the arrangement but had mentioned once in passing that the road to the ranch was considerably better when there was a reason to maintain it, and that he had had Pedro grade it the previous week. She was at the ranch every Thursday. He was there most Thursdays, doing the things a rancher does in the morning, working the animals, checking fences, speaking to Pedro about the business of the land. They talked when she came and went. Short conversations that were always direct and always moved in new directions, never the same subject twice in a row. He told her about the cattle market and the politics of water rights, and a drought that had hit the Southern Territory 2 years before and nearly broken 3 ranches, his own among them. She told him about the children's progress and about the book she was working through and about a letter she had received from her sister Clara, who was asking cautious questions about New Mexico that felt like the questions of someone considering a change. "Would you want your sister here?" he asked one Thursday in October, standing at the fence in the early morning with a coffee cup in his hand that was not untouched this time. "I would want her wherever she would be happy," Edna said. "I'm not certain she knows what that is yet." "That is a kind way of answering the question," he said. "I did not answer the question actually," she said. "I redirected it." He looked at her sideways. "I noticed." "Then you are paying close attention," she said, and the moment the words were out she felt the temperature of the air between them shift slightly, the way air shifts before a weather change that is definitely coming. He looked at her directly. "I am," he said. Flat and simple and devastating in its plainness. She looked away first, toward the mesa, which was morning gold and indifferent to whatever was happening at the corral fence below it. She rode back to town in the wagon and thought about plainness. November arrived, and with it the first real cold, which in New Mexico was more philosophical than deadly, but was cold nonetheless. The kind that made fires necessary and made people aware of the comfort of other people's company. The school was well established now, and even Franklin Rue had been publicly quiet on the subject of Edna Dalton for several weeks, which Beatrice interpreted as either tactical patience or an admission that the position was won. He had not forgotten, though. Edna knew that because she had found a letter on her desk in the school one morning, written in a hand she did not recognize, warning her that if she continued to associate with the Graves Ranch, she would find the council's support harder to maintain. No signature, no specific threat, nothing that could be taken to anyone official, just the shape of a warning dressed in polite language. She showed it to August on the following Thursday. She had not planned to, but she arrived at the ranch and he was there on the porch with his morning coffee, and she walked up the steps and held it out to him. He read it. His face did something very controlled. "This is Rue's writing," he said. "Have seen his correspondence." "What does he want?" she asked. "He wants you gone," August said. "He has wanted that since you walked in and refused to be diminished. Men like Rue do not easily forgive that." He was quiet a moment. "He also wants me to stop being useful to you because my independence from his financial system is an annoyance he tolerates generally but would like to neutralize when it serves his purposes." She looked at him. "Are you in danger?" "My ranch is clear of debt. My water rights are registered. He has no legal purchase on anything I own." He folded the letter carefully. "But I should tell you something. About a year before you arrived, Rue attempted to call in a loan early on the Villanueva property on a technicality that did not hold up legally, but by the time the Villanuevas proved the technicality, the anxiety had made old Mr. Villanueva's health worse. He died 3 months later. Some people in this town hold Rue responsible for that quietly." Edna went very still. "Rosa's grandfather?" "Yes." "Rosa," Edna said quietly. "She never mentioned it." "She is 11 years old, and she is also the kind of person who reads things twice over," August said. She probably decided she did not want to burden her teacher with family grief that was not related to arithmetic. Edna sat down on the porch step, which was not a conscious decision, more a consequence of something settling heavily in her. The sky above the mesa was the pale blue of cold mornings, very clear and very far. "He needs to be stopped," she said. "Yes," August said. He sat down on the step beside her, which was close, closer than they had been before in any setting, and she was aware of the warmth of him in the cold air. "But he cannot be stopped through anger or accusation alone. He will need to be stopped through documentation and through people who owe him nothing being willing to speak publicly. People like you," she said. "People like me," he said. "I have been thinking about how to do it. I have also been thinking that it should not fall entirely to me, because I am one man and one voice, and this town will change faster if more people stand up than if one man stands up for everyone." She turned her head and looked at him at close range. He was looking at the mesa. His profile was the profile of a man who thinks carefully and speaks carefully and acts even more carefully, a man with a long internal timeline. She felt something run through her that was distinct from gratitude or admiration or trust, though it contained all three. "You said you are paying close attention," she said, from the conversation 2 weeks prior that had not been fully concluded. He turned and looked at her. They were very close on the step, close enough that she could see the specific dark quality of his eyes and the particular stillness of a man who does not perform anything. "I am," he said, again, the same words, the same terrible plainness. "I have been paying attention too," she said. "I want you to know that. I have been doing it since the night you walked across an empty room." He was quiet for a long moment, not the quiet of uncertainty. The quiet of a man who is deciding whether the ground will hold his weight before he steps forward. "I do not want to complicate your life," he said. "You came here to build something and you are building it and it is yours. I'm not interested in inserting myself into that as a liability." "You have not been a liability," she said. "You have been a neighbor who pays very close attention, a beat. I would like to know if you want to be something more than a neighbor." "I am asking directly because I find that method more efficient." He almost laughed. Nearly. The sound of it was very quiet and very real, and she found it more affecting than the most polished compliment she had ever received. "Yes," he said, "I would like that. I would like to know if you want that too, accounting for the fact that I am not a man with a great deal of poetry in him, and my social instincts are limited, and I spend the majority of my time thinking about cattle and water rights and fence mechanisms." "Those are not disqualifying qualities," she said. "I spent a year engaged to a man with a great deal of polish and no honesty. I find I prefer the inverse." He looked at her. A long, direct, uncomplicated look. "Then we are in agreement," he said. "We are in agreement," she said. December brought cold that was serious and beautiful, and it brought a development that changed the shape of everything. Edna had been sending letters to the mayor of Albuquerque and to the Territorial Land Office about what she had learned from speaking to multiple families in Clearwater Gulch. The pattern of Franklin Rue's lending practices, the early call-ins, the interest rate manipulations, the way he had systematically leveraged small farmers and ranchers at moments of vulnerability. She had done this quietly, over weeks, gathering testimony from people who trusted her with their children's education, and therefore, eventually, trusted her with their stories. She had shown her progress to August on Thursdays, and he had read every page and contributed what he knew from his own experience of the bank, which was not inconsiderable. Pedro had spoken to the families of several of Rue's former borrowers who had lost small properties and helped her establish a pattern that was coherent and documented. She had not told anyone else what she was doing because she did not know how Rue would respond if he found out before the documentation was complete. He found out in December because someone talked, and Edna came into the school on a Monday morning to find the front door standing open and the inside of the classroom disturbed, not destroyed, but touched, drawers left not quite closed, books moved, the box she kept her papers in opened and some of the papers missing. She stood in the doorway for a full minute. Then she walked to Beatrice Harlow's house and told her what she had found. Beatrice sent her runner, a boy named Eli who delivered messages for the hotel, to the Graves Ranch. August was in town within 2 hours. He walked into Beatrice's parlor where Edna was sitting at the table with the papers that remained, organizing what she still had, and he looked at the organized papers and then at her face and said, "What is missing?" "3 letters of testimony," she said. "From the Prentice family, from old Mrs. Carey who lost her property in 1879, and from the Morales brothers whose farm was sold at auction in 1880. But I have copies of 2 of the 3. The Morales testimony is gone entirely." He sat down across from her. "Was that the most specific one?" "It was the most specific one," she said. "It documented the exact mechanism he used, the specific false interest calculation." August was quiet, thinking. She did not fill the silence which she had learned was the right thing to do when he was working through a problem. "The Morales brothers," he said. "Daniel Morales is living in Mesilla now. I know this because Pedro's brother-in-law knows him. If we could get to Daniel Morales in person before Rue has time to put pressure on him to recant or stay silent, we might be able to get the testimony directly, in writing, in front of a notary." Edna looked at him. "How far is Mesilla?" 2 days' ride," he said. "1 day by fast stage if the southbound comes through this week." "When does the southbound run?" "Thursday," he said. She looked at her papers. She looked at him. "I have school Thursday morning." "I can get someone to cover Thursday morning," he said. "Marta can handle Thursday morning with a primer." "Can you leave the ranch for that long?" "Pedro has managed this ranch without me for longer stretches than 2 days," he said. "He will be annoyed, but he will manage." She understood what he was proposing, and she understood that it was not nothing, a journey of 2 days alone to another town to recover evidence. She understood that in 1882 in New Mexico territory, this was the kind of thing that required either a formal relationship or a very good explanation, and possibly both. She also understood that she had been building toward something with August Graves for 3 months that was not slow in its emotional content, only slow in its formal expression, and that he was offering her something by proposing this that he probably did not have full language for yet either. "I will write to the notary in Mesilla tonight," she said, "if you can make the stage arrangements." He nodded. "August," she said. He looked at her. "This is dangerous," she said. "If Rue knows we are going for the testimony directly, he may try to interfere." "Yes," he said simply, "he may. I want to make sure you understand that I am not asking you to take risks on my behalf." He looked at her steadily. "I am not taking risks on your behalf. I am taking risks on behalf of the Morales family and every other family this man has robbed, and also on behalf of the community I have lived in for 5 years and intend to live in for considerably longer." A pause. "The fact that you are also in this fight does not diminish my own reasons for being in it. I want to be clear about that." She felt the full truth of it, and it moved through her like something that had been waiting for an opening. "All right," she said. The stage south left Thursday morning, and Edna was on it, with August beside her, in the frost-sharp early hours when the town was still pulling itself out of sleep. Pedro had said nothing about the arrangement except to hand August a folded oilskin in case of rain and say, in Spanish, something that made August turn slightly red. Edna had asked, and August had said Pedro had made a comment about time and sense that was not worth translating. The journey south was 2 days of conversation and landscape, and the kind of forced proximity that strips away everything performative and leaves only what is actually true. They talked for hours about things that had nothing to do with Franklin Rue or school councils or evidence collection. He told her about his boyhood in Missouri, about a river he had loved to fish in as a child, about the particular silence of the plains at 4 in the morning before anything had started yet. She told him about her mother's kitchen in Philadelphia, about the specific smell of books in the academy library where she had taught, about a summer she had spent at her grandmother's farm in Maryland that was the happiest she could remember. They stopped at a ranch overnight that belonged to a family August knew, the Hendersons, who gave them separate rooms without comment. And at supper Mrs. Henderson had looked at the two of them with the experienced eye of a woman who understood exactly what was happening regardless of what had been declared. In the morning, walking to the stage that had stopped overnight at the Henderson property, Edna said, without planning to, "I've been afraid of wanting things." He was beside her in the cold morning air and he stopped walking. She stopped too. "Afraid of what specifically?" he asked. "Of wanting a life that depends on another person," she said. "Of organizing my happiness around someone else's choices. I did that once and it cost me almost everything, and I came here specifically to build something that was mine independent of anyone." "I know," he said. "I do not want to stop being independent," she said. "I do not think that is actually what love requires, but I have been burned by the version that does require it, and I am still working out which kind is which." He looked at her in the gray morning light. "I do not want you to be anything other than exactly what you are," he said. "I was specific about this when I said I am not inserting myself as a liability. I mean the inverse too. I am not asking you to be smaller. I am not interested in a woman I have to manage. I would be deeply bored." She felt something unlock in her chest, not all the way, not yet, but with the specific sensation of a thing that has been braced for too long beginning to release. "You are really very direct," she said. "I find honesty takes less energy," he said, and she heard the echo of the first thing he had ever said to her about himself, the night in the empty hall, and she understood that it was not a performance then and it was not a performance now. She took his hand. It was the first time she had done that. His hand was the hand of a working man, calloused and large, and he held hers with a careful and absolute steadiness, like someone who has been given something valuable and intends to hold it properly. They walked to the stage like that. Mesilla was a larger town than Clearwater Gulch, with a proper courthouse and a notary public named Mr. Hartwell, who was both efficient and imperturbable. Daniel Morales was 52 years old and had been working as a carpenter since he had lost the farm, and he received them in the small house where he boarded with a mixture of wariness and something underneath it that was a great deal older and angrier, the particular anger of a man who has been wronged and has had to live quietly with that wrong because fighting it openly cost too much. He listened to Edna explain what she had gathered, what she was building, and what she needed from him. He asked two careful questions. He looked at August. "You are the man who has the ranch north of Clearwater," he said. "I am," August said. "You owe Rue nothing." "Nothing," August said. Daniel Morales was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Edna. "My brother Salvador, he left New Mexico after we lost the farm. He went to Arizona. I have not seen him in 2 years. We had 40 acres. My grandfather homesteaded that land in 1847. Rue took it on a calculation that his own bank teller, a man named Fletcher who quit and left town 6 months after, told me was wrong. I never had the proof in a form that could be used." He paused. "You have a form that can be used." "I have a notary in this room," Edna said. "And I have a letter from the Territorial Land Commissioner's office acknowledging receipt of my initial complaint and requesting formal documentation. If you will tell me what happened in specific terms in front of Mr. Hartwell, I can add your sworn testimony to a file that is now on record with the territory." He looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he looked up. "All right," he said. "Let us do this." 2 hours later they had the testimony, notarized and signed and witnessed, and Daniel Morales had the copy he had requested for himself, folded into the inside pocket of his work coat. He shook Edna's hand and then August's, and when he looked at August he said in Spanish, something that August translated later on the stage north as approximately, "Take care of her. She is the kind of person who will take care of everyone else and forget to save anything for herself." Edna, who had studied enough Spanish to get the general shape of it, said, "I understood most of that." "Good," August said. He had her hand again. He seemed to find this arrangement natural now. she found she did too. The formal complaint was filed with the New Mexico territorial government in January of 1883. It was the kind of legal process that moved slowly and without drama, the kind that operates in paper and ink rather than in confrontation. But its direction was inevitable once the documentation reached the right desk. The Territorial Auditor's Office sent an examiner to Clearwater Gulch in February, a serious man named Whitmore who bore no relation to Charles Whitmore of Philadelphia, which Edna was grateful for. He spent 3 weeks examining the bank's records. Franklin Rue was present for all of it, correct and composed and absolutely unable to make the records say something different from what they said. The legal conclusion came in April. Rue was not imprisoned, which was a limitation of the law as it existed, and as it was enforced on the frontier in 1883, but he was assessed substantial penalties, required to return overpaid interest to 17 families, and stripped of his position on the town council under a newly applied territorial regulation about officers who had been found to have acted in financial bad faith. He retained ownership of the bank under a supervised arrangement, but his social authority, the thing he had cultivated and maintained through 14 years of careful manipulation, collapsed with remarkable speed once people understood that the story was true and that there had been someone willing to document it. He remained in Clearwater Gulch for another 6 months and then sold the bank to a banking house from Denver and left. Edna heard later that he had gone to Texas, which was large enough to absorb a man with his particular history. The town council election that spring saw James Alcott, to everyone's moderate surprise, vote publicly in favor of Edna's proposal to expand the school to a 2-room building and hire an assistant teacher for the younger children. It seemed that Alcott had decided, upon reflection, that backing the right side of history was better for business than backing the powerful side, and he was not wrong. He became a reliable if mercenary ally, which was its own kind of useful. The 17 families who received restitution from Rue's bank did something interesting and organic and unrequested. Several of them, without coordination, sent food to the schoolhouse over the course of a week in the spring. One family sent lumber. The Morales family, which had been reconnected through the legal process, sent word from Mesilla that Daniel and his brother Salvador were considering whether they could return. In the end, they did not return to the farm, which had been sold to a third party, but Daniel Morales moved back to Clearwater Gulch and set up a carpentry shop and carved a sign for the school that read Clearwater Gulch School, Miss Edna Dalton, teacher, and hung it above the door, and Edna stood in front of it on the morning he installed it and said nothing for a full minute, which was as close to crying in public as she intended to allow herself. August was there, which he frequently was on some pretext or another, and when she turned away from the sign she found him standing behind her with his hat in his hand for once, as if the occasion required it, watching her with that expression that had no category but that she now knew the feeling of, the specific and irreplaceable feeling of being seen by someone who is looking at the real version of you rather than the version you perform. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. She laughed the real laugh again, the unrationed one. "Come to dinner tonight," she said. "Mrs. Harlow is cooking. She says she has been meaning to cook for you for months and has been frustrated by your ranch's inconvenient location." "I will come to dinner," he said. He came to dinner, and there were 5 people at Beatrice Harlow's table that evening: Edna and August and Beatrice and Marta Ibanez, who had driven in with Pedro. And it was the kind of evening that arranges itself around a table of people who have come through something together and are now on the other side of it, and are finding, with some mutual surprise, that the other side is very pleasant. The food was very good, and the conversation was warm and loud, and nobody was performing anything for anyone. And at the end of it, when Pedro and Marta had gone and Beatrice had excused herself with the particular tact of a woman who has managed the emotional lives of other people for 30 years, August and Edna sat on Beatrice's front porch in the April night that was cold enough for coats and warm enough for sitting, and said nothing at all for a few minutes, which was by this point one of their most practiced and comfortable modes. "I want to ask you something," August said. She waited. "I want to ask you properly," he said. "I am aware that you came here to build a life that was yours, independent of any man's plans for you, and I want to be clear that I am asking because I want to be part of your life, not because I want to redirect it." She looked at him. Her heart was doing the hammering thing again, the thing she had felt on the night of the social, but this time it was not from fear or humiliation, but from the specific exhilarating anxiety of standing at the edge of something you have chosen to step toward. "I am listening," she said. "Edna," he said, and the way he said her name was so plain and so serious that it went into her like a sound finding the right frequency in a room. "I would like to marry you. I have been in love with you since at least November. I think possibly since the moment you walked into Holt's store with your chin up and your reasons prepared. I have a ranch and a good well and 12 miles between us and town, and I am a man who does not attend socials willingly, and who thinks about fence mechanisms more than is probably romantic. And if those are disqualifying, I understand, and I will walk you back to this door and go home, and that will be that. But I wanted to say it plainly because you deserve the plain version of everything." She was quiet for a long moment, not because she did not know the answer, because she wanted to hold the question for a second before she answered it, to feel the full weight of it, the real and specific thing it was, not a transaction or a rescue or a social arrangement, but a man she trusted and admired and loved, asking her in plain language to build something together. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you, August Graves. And I want you to know that I have been in love with you since at least November too, possibly since the night you set down an untouched cup of punch and walked across an empty room, which is not a romantic origin story in any conventional sense, but is completely and entirely ours." He looked at her. The country that borders Esmile closed the distance at last, a real smile, full and warm and not performed, a smile she had not seen at full measure before and which was, she thought, probably not something he distributed frequently, which made the fact of it in that moment feel like something she had been given. He took her hands in both of his. "I have a ring that belonged to my mother," he said. "It is at the ranch. I did not bring it tonight because I did not want to assume." "Bring it next time," she said. "I will bring it next time," he said. They were married in June of 1883 in the Clearwater Gulch church, whose white paint had finally been renewed by a community effort in the spring, on a Saturday afternoon when the sky above New Mexico was the particular brilliant blue of high summer. Reverend Morrison performed the ceremony with a warmth that suggested he felt at least partially responsible for the outcome, which was not entirely inaccurate. Beatrice Harlow stood with Edna, and Pedro Ibanez stood with August, and Marta had organized the flowers and the supper, and was doing the thing where she was doing everything and pretending to have done nothing. Daniel Morales was in attendance, and Rosa Villanueva was there in a dress that was clearly new, and she sat in the front row with her slate because she was composing something. And when they left the church, she ran up and pressed a piece of paper into Edna's hand that said, in careful handwriting, "I am glad you came here. Your pupil, Rosa." Edna folded it and put it in her glove and cried briefly on August's shoulder in the church door, while the assembled guests pretended not to notice, which was a gift. Clara Dalton arrived from Philadelphia in August of 1883, because it turned out that Edna's letters home had been more persuasive than she had intended, the letters that talked about red dust and big sky, and a community being built from actual necessity rather than inherited convention. Clara was 22 and had her sister's stubborn chin and a livelier personality that immediately endeared her to approximately half the town and alarmed the other half, which Edna thought was about right. Clara stayed. She was teaching at the school by October as Edna's assistant, and she was also engaged within a year to Reverend Morrison's younger brother, who had come to visit and had somehow stayed, which Edna was certain would have surprised no one who had met Clara for more than 10 minutes. The ranch house on the Graves property underwent an expansion in the fall of 1883, a new room added on the east side for August's study, which was where he kept his ranch ledgers and his land maps, and increasingly, a small but specific collection of books that had migrated from Edna's boxes over the months of their cohabitation. The room had a window that faced the mesa, and Edna used it in the early mornings before school and in the evenings after, and August used it in the middle hours of the day when the ranch work had a natural pause, and they had developed an entirely comfortable and wordless system for sharing it. She had a habit of leaving a book face down on the desk when she left, marking her place. He had a habit of leaving coffee for her in a cup on the corner of the desk before she arrived in the morning, because she woke later than he did, and the coffee was always hot but never still steaming, which meant he had timed it precisely. She had noticed this in October and said nothing for a week, and then one morning she had looked at the coffee and at him where he was standing at the window looking at the mesa, and she had said, "You time the coffee," and he had said, "I know when you get up," and she had said, "That is either very thoughtful or somewhat concerning," and he had almost laughed, and she had crossed the room and kissed him on the cheek, which was not dramatic and was not theatrical, but was the specific and daily language of two people who had decided on each other and meant it. Their first child was born in the summer of 1884, a son, and August stood in the doorway of the bedroom where Marta and Mrs. Henderson and the local doctor who had come the 12 miles out on fast notice had been working for 7 long hours, and when the doctor came out, he looked like a man who had been to war and back. And when he told August it was a son and that Edna was well, August sat down on the porch step where he had sat with Edna on a cold November morning and put his face in his hands for approximately 30 seconds, which Pedro witnessed from the yard, and which he mentioned only once, years later. On a very warm evening, after a great deal of mezcal, they named the boy Samuel, after August's father, who had died when August was 19, and whom he did not often speak of, but had loved in the specific and wordless way of men who have grown up in the presence of decent and mostly silent fathers. Samuel Graves turned out to be a child of extreme opinions and very loud feelings, which Edna found poetically fair given her own history of public self-expression, and which August received with a patience that surprised him, and which probably should not have surprised anyone who understood him at all. Rosa Villanueva, who was 15 by the time Samuel was born, and who had become a regular presence at the ranch in the way that students sometimes become extensions of their teachers' lives, was the first non-family person to hold Samuel after Marta, and she held him with the same serious, focused attention she brought to everything. And she told Edna afterward that she intended to be a teacher too, and she was going to need letters of recommendation. Edna said she would write them herself, in any quantity required. The summer Rosa left for the normal school in Santa Fe, Edna stood at the school door watching the wagon that carried her ride south, and thought about the letter she had written from a hotel room in Philadelphia on a cold night in January 1882, the letter to the Ladies' Settlement Society, the letter that had started all of this. She had written it in desperation and had arrived in desperation, and had stood in an empty social hall with her chin up and her heart hammering, surrounded by the ruins of one evening, and had been too busy holding herself together to notice the one man who had stayed. She thought about that now, and it made her chest do something complicated and full. She walked back into the school, where 23 children between ages 6 and 13 were waiting for her to begin the afternoon reading session, and she began. In 1885 they had a second child, a girl they named Louisa, who arrived in the spring and who had dark hair from the first day, unmistakably Edna's, and who slept with a completeness that Samuel had never possessed, and which August described, once, as trustworthy, which made Edna laugh for a very long time. The ranch continued to grow, methodically, not dramatically, in the way of land managed by a man who took the long view. August had added cattle to the herd, hired 2 additional ranch hands, and in 1886 drilled a second well that served both his property and, through an arrangement negotiated over 3 meetings and several handshakes, the property of his neighbor to the north, a homesteader named Frank Cady, who had been struggling with water access for 2 years. Pedro had opinions about the Cady arrangement, specifically about whether their water was being shared more than their water rights strictly required. August had said yes, probably. Pedro had sighed the sigh of a man surrounded by people whose generosity regularly interfered with clean accounting. August had said he would note Pedro's objection in the ledger. Pedro had said at least put it in the ledger. It went in the ledger. Marta Ibanez said privately to Edna that Pedro would do the same thing in August's position and was simply maintaining his reputation for fiscal common sense, and that both of them knew this, and that this was the kind of thing that kept working partnerships working for 20 years. In the evenings in the study room that faced the mesa, when the children were in bed and the ranch was settled into its nighttime quiet, August and Edna sat together in the lamplight. And sometimes they talked, and sometimes they read, and sometimes they simply existed in the same room in the way that people do when they have built something real together and know it, when the presence of another person has become as natural and necessary as water or light. He had a habit, she had noticed over 3 years of marriage, of putting his hand over hers when she was reading, not to interrupt her, not to start a conversation, just to make contact, the same way you might touch something you valued to confirm it was still there. She had never mentioned this to him because she did not want him to become self-conscious about it and stop. One evening in the fall of 1886, with Samuel asleep and Louisa making the small noises of a child who is thinking about waking up but has not committed to it yet, she looked up from the book she was reading and looked at him, and he looked up from his ledger at the same moment, and they looked at each other across the lamplight. She thought about the night in the hall, the last lantern, the empty dance floor, the man who had stayed. She thought about all the things she had built since then, the school, the community, the legal fight, the life, the children asleep in the next room, the second well that served the Cady family's water needs, the sign above the school door, the ring on her hand that had belonged to his mother. She thought about walking into Thomas Holt's store with her chin up and her reasons prepared, and about an untouched cup of punch set down on a table, and about a man who said, "I find dishonesty takes more energy than I have available." She thought about the specific grace of arriving somewhere broken and finding, in a place you did not expect, the exact kind of honesty that mends things. She thought about how love, the real kind, the kind she had been afraid of and had kept herself closed against for a year, was not a transaction and was not a rescue, and was not something that required you to be smaller. It was something that happened in the same room in the lamplight, between 2 people who had both chosen each other with their eyes open, who had fought together and spoken plainly and held hands on a stage going south, who had learned each other's habits and made space for them without being asked. August was watching her with that expression that still had no category and that she no longer needed to categorize. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking," she said, "that I did not notice you all evening at that social." He waited. "And I am thinking," she said, "that it is possibly the luckiest non-noticing of my entire life, because when I finally looked, you were the only one left standing." He looked at her for a long moment, the lamplight, the mesa outside the window, invisible in the dark but present as it always was. "I was not trying to be the last one standing," he said. "I was trying to leave." "I know," she said. "I stayed because something stopped me," he said. "I am still not entirely certain what." She smiled at him. Not the performed smile, not the chin-up smile, not the strategic smile, just the real one, the one that was his and had been his for years. "I was the most interesting problem in the room," she said. "You said so yourself. You look at things you are genuinely trying to understand." He looked at her steadily. The almost smile arrived and stayed this time, warm and real in the lamplight. "Yes," he said, "I do." Louisa decided at that moment to commit fully to waking up, which she announced at volume, and August stood and went to see to her, which he did without being asked, which was one of approximately 10,000 small things Edna could have put in a list of evidence that she had been right about him from the very beginning. She listened to his voice from the next room, low and even, the voice he used with the children and with the horses and occasionally with Pedro when Pedro was upset about something, the voice that was the audio version of a steady hand. She looked back at her book. She did not read it for another few minutes. She was too busy being grateful. Not the desperate grateful of someone who narrowly escaped something terrible, though she had been that too. The deep-settled grateful of someone who has landed, at last, exactly where they should be. The years were good. They were not without difficulty, because nothing is, and the frontier was still a place that demanded things of people on a regular basis. There was a drought in 1887 that was serious and costly, and required August and Pedro, and the Cady family, and 3 other neighboring ranches to cooperate on water management in ways that were complicated and occasionally fraught. There was a hard winter the following year that took 2 of the herd and tested everyone's patience and resources. There were the ordinary difficult years of raising children, the years of illness and stubbornness, and the specific exhaustion of keeping small people alive and whole and developing in the right directions. But the school continued to grow, and by 1888 it had 3 rooms and 2 teachers in addition to Edna, one of whom was a young man named Henry Vickers who had come from Missouri, and who was the most patient and methodical teacher of arithmetic Edna had ever encountered. Clara was still in Clearwater Gulch, married now to Morrison's brother James, with a daughter of her own, and she and Edna saw each other twice a week at minimum, and spoke freely and fought occasionally, and made up immediately, which is the correct rhythm for sisters who genuinely love each other. Marta Ibanez remained the best friend Edna had in New Mexico, which was not nothing given how many good people she had come to know. They still met on Wednesday mornings when Marta came to town, and the nature of their conversation had evolved over the years from the practical necessities of new friendship to the wide-ranging and comfortable conversations of 2 women who knew each other well and trusted each other with the real content of their lives. Marta spoke of her family in New Mexico, of her brothers in Taos, of the specific complicated beauty of living in a land that your people had been part of for generations, and that had been reorganized around you by forces you had not chosen, and of how she held all of that without letting it make her bitter, which was a daily practice and not a permanent achievement. Edna listened to this with the particular attention she gave to things that mattered, and understood more each year about what it meant to acknowledge injustice without pretending it had not happened. She taught this to her students. She taught them history that was true rather than comfortable. Some of the parents had opinions about this, not all of them positive, and there were 2 town council meetings in the late 1880s where curriculum was discussed with more heat than the subject strictly required. Edna attended both meetings, which women still could not vote in but could attend in the public gallery, and she said her piece in the public comment portions with the same chin-up directness she had always brought to rooms that were not designed to hear her, and the curriculum stayed substantially as she had organized it. August attended the second of the 2 meetings, sitting in the back of the room in plain clothes with his arms folded, which communicated clearly to anyone who knew him that he was not there for any purpose except to be present and visible, which was sometimes the most useful thing a person could be. They did not need to discuss it afterward. They walked home in the dark together, Samuel on August's shoulders because he had fallen asleep in the meeting and was too heavy to carry any other way at age 6, Louisa holding Edna's hand and asking why grown-ups argued about books. Because books have ideas in them, Edna said, and people are afraid of ideas, Louisa said. Some people, Edna said, some people are afraid that ideas will change things. Do ideas change things? Louisa asked. Yes, Edna said. That is exactly what they do. Louisa considered this. "I think that is good," she said. "So do I," Edna said. By 1890, the Graves Ranch was one of the most stable small operations in the region. Not the largest and not the wealthiest, but characterized by a consistency that had weathered 2 droughts, one hard winter, shifting cattle prices, and the general volatility of frontier economics. August had added a hay-cutting arrangement with the Cady family that benefited both operations. Pedro had managed to not say, "I told you so about the Cady water arrangement," which was a feat of restraint he referenced on special occasions. Daniel Morales had built a reputation as the best carpenter in Clearwater Gulch and the surrounding area. He had carved a rocking chair as a wedding gift in 1883, which sat on the porch of the Graves Ranch house and had been sat in by approximately everyone who had ever visited, and which Samuel had claimed as his own by age 4 and had to be periodically reminded was not exclusively his. There was a third child born in 1889, another boy, which Samuel received with the mixed feelings of a child who has been the eldest for 5 years and has opinions about new arrangements. They named him Theodore, after August's uncle Clement Theodore Graves, because August had decided by the time of the third child that he owed his uncle's memory more formal acknowledgement than he had been giving it. Theodore was from the first day a remarkably easy child, which Edna privately attributed to the universe making a fair exchange for Samuel's first 3 years. The summer of 1891 was the best summer of Edna's memory, which was a sentence she said out loud to August one August evening, sitting on the porch in the late light, which he had later pointed out was interesting phrasing given his name. The children were 7, 6, and 2 respectively, and they had reached an age in combination where the ranch was a genuinely magical place for them, large enough to contain endless exploration, structured enough to be safe, inhabited by animals and interesting adults, and the specific freedom of a frontier childhood that neither Edna nor August had possessed in their own childhoods. Rosa Villanueva, who was now in her 2nd year of teaching at a school in Santa Fe, had come to visit in July and had spent a week, and she and Edna had spent an evening on the porch talking about education and about New Mexico and about the future, and Rosa had said, with the considered calm of someone who had arrived at something important, "You are the reason I believed I could do this. I want you to know that." Edna had said, "You are the reason I kept doing it. That seems fair." On the last night of Rosa's visit, they had all eaten dinner together on the long porch table that August had built the 2nd summer of their marriage. All of them. Rosa and Daniel Morales, who had come for the evening, and Marta and Pedro and Clara and James Morrison and their daughter Hannah and all the children. And it was the kind of dinner that cannot be planned. That happens when the right people are in the right place at the right time, and the food is good, and the sky is doing something beautiful, and everyone is, for that hour, simply happy in an unqualified way. August sat at the end of the table with Theodore asleep on his lap and a cup of coffee in his hand, and he was watching all of it with that particular quality of attention that was so characteristic of him, steady and present and not performing anything. And Edna looked at him from the other end of the table, and he looked at her. And the specific and wordless communication they had developed over 8 years of mornings and evenings and arguments and reconciliations and fence mechanisms and coffee timed to the minute passed between them like current, quick and sure. She raised her cup slightly. He raised his. They drank, and the evening went on around them, full and warm and real. The kind of life that is built one day at a time by 2 people who choose each other consistently, who say what they mean and mean what they say, who are honest when it is inconvenient and present when it matters and patient with each other's rough edges, because they understand that the rough edges are not incidental, but are actually part of the substance. In 1893, Samuel went to school in Santa Fe, which cost August more in the way of visible emotion than he had expected, and which he processed on the porch in the evenings for about a week before arriving at the conclusion that his eldest son going to get an education was in fact exactly what he wanted for him, and that the feelings about it were feelings about time passing rather than about anything gone wrong, which was a distinction that made it manageable. Edna wrote Samuel a letter every week without missing one. He wrote back less frequently, but with the specific and clumsy sincerity of a 13-year-old boy who had inherited his father's directness and his mother's vocabulary, and was still working out how to use the combination. Louisa was already demonstrating that she was going to be a teacher, which was probably inevitable, and which Edna tried to receive neutrally, as a daughter's choice rather than an inheritance, while privately being incandescently pleased. Theodore, at 4, had decided that the horses were the most important thing in the world, which Pedro received with the satisfaction of a man whose worldview had been confirmed. The school in Clearwater Gulch expanded again in 1892, now 4 rooms, now part of the official New Mexico territorial school system, now with a formal charter. Edna's name was on the charter. She had read it 3 times when she received the official document, running her finger over the letters. Edna Graves, founder and principal teacher, Clearwater Gulch School, Clearwater Gulch, New Mexico Territory, Est. 1882. She had been Edna Dalton when she arrived. She was Edna Graves now, and both names were hers, and neither one canceled the other, and the life she had was built from both. August found her in the study that evening, sitting at the desk with the charter in front of her. He stood in the doorway in the lamplight. "Are you going to read it again?" he said. "Possibly," she said. He came in and stood behind her and read it over her shoulder. She felt him, warm and steady and entirely familiar behind her, the presence she had organized her life around in the only way she had ever been willing to organize her life around another person, not dependently, not as a consequence, but as a deliberate and daily choice. He put his hand on her shoulder. She put her hand over his. Outside the window the mesa was dark and enormous and present, as it had always been, as it would go on being long after all of them were part of the dust of this country they had chosen. "I was the most reluctant rancher at that social," he said quietly. She looked up and back at him. "I know," she said. "I did not notice you until you were the only one left standing." He looked at her. "And now?" She turned the rest of the way to face him, and the lamplight was between them, and the mesa was behind the dark window, and the children were in the next rooms, and the life they had made was all around them in every direction. "Now," she said, "I notice you every day. And I intend to keep doing it." He smiled at her. The full smile, warm and unperformed, the one she had counted as a gift every single time it arrived. He bent and kissed her, and the charter lay on the desk with both their hands over it, and outside the window the New Mexico night was big and cold and full of stars, and inside the lamplight was warm and the room smelled of coffee and old books and the good clean presence of a life that had been chosen freely, built carefully, and loved without reservation. They stayed there in the lamplight in the room that faced the mesa for a long time, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.